I had to go home. So I went and got the COVID test, waited for the negative result, and bought a one-way ticket to Hong Kong. The first flight was from DC to the LaGuardia Airport in New York City. It was the first time I had traveled in almost 2 years. And as the plane flew over Manhattan, I couldn't help but felt a bit excited. I was glad that I got a window seat. The city looked great. When I landed, there were soldiers dressed in camouflage, making sure everyone was filling out the health declaration forms on their phones. And I had to take an Uber to switch airport. When I got to JFK, everything was already closed. I wish I had gotten something to eat earlier. Around midnight, I finally got on the plane to Hong Kong. I had not eaten any food since lunch that day, but at least they had my new favorite show on the plane. And this is how to go home during a pandemic. The plane was only about 1/10 full, and I got to stretch my legs. This is something worth documenting, I thought, something to brag about to my friends later. I woke up in the middle of the night trying to see the northern lights, but couldn't see any. When I landed in Hong Kong, a bunch of people in hazmat suits showed up and took someone off the plane in a wheelchair. I weaved through maybe half a mile of walkways through the empty airport before people with walkie-talkies told me not to film. Shortly after having taken the second COVID test for the trip, I walked to the end of this huge concourse to wait for my results for the next 6 hours or so. If you're good at multitasking, you could play Hay Day while video chatting with your family to pass the time. I got my negative results and was ushered onto a shuttle, which took me past all these planes wearing PPEs. Maybe planes too could catch the virus. I breezed through customs and walked to the quarantine hotel I had booked for the trip. I picked the airport hotel because I didn't want to take another shuttle after having traveled for 20 plus hours. It was finally time for me to relax. As I walked through the hallways of the hotel, a sense of dread but also a tiny rush of adrenaline crept up my spine. I had been working from home for the past year and had been relatively spared from the worst ramifications of the pandemic. I had not even been to a grocery store in a while, ordering almost everything online. And so there was a sense of excitement to see the display of how the pandemic had changed the world up close, like a prince surveying the battlefield. The hotel looked older than what I was expecting, because in my mind this was supposed to be the new hotel by the new airport. Then I realized the quote-unquote new airport was opened back in 1998. I couldn't help but feel a little bit old, but also in a prince surveying the battlefield kind of way. I knew I wasn't actually that old, although I could see that the crest of the hill wasn't too far away. I got to the room where I would be staying for the next 21 days. I was glad that they had given me a room facing the runway instead of the courtyard. I was sad to discover that the runway was not in use, although a construction site nearby could perhaps make up for the action. I tried watching some TV, but it was kind of weird. It also took me a while to get used to listening to Cantonese, my mother tongue, after having lived in the US for so long. Three times a day, I waited for meals to be delivered by the Department of Health. I was hoping that the food would be catered by the hotel, but no, they were essentially hospital food. I could order from the hotel if I wanted, but if I did that, the free food would probably have to go to waste. In all, the food weren't too bad. There was always a thing of starch, usually rice, accompanied by some veggies and some meat. The guy from yesterday was wearing the same shirt, it looked like. It was either that or he had a whole closet full of green shirts, like a superhero. I was sure it was the same guy because of the way he walked. I knew him pretty well by now. Not much happened over the next few days. I tried doing laundry by hand. I tried out the time-lapse function on my phone. I tried taking a video of the sunset, but the phone kept focusing on the dust on the window. I tried to have some kind of a workout routine, but it just meant more laundry to wash. On day 7, there was some police action. The construction workers were entertained as well. On the 12th day, I took my 3rd COVID test for the trip. It was the throat kind again, my least favorite. I gagged and apologized to the nurse. The next day, I was woken up by a bassy rumble. The runway facing my window was back in commission. It was a good day.
Wait, is that the same green guy? Is he a woman? Has he been a woman this whole time? Oh, never mind. There he is.
On day 19, I took my 4th COVID test, the one that would clear me to leave the hotel. I had been saving and stacking all the plastic containers from the meals so that maybe they could be recycled and not be treated as biohazard. Maybe. It was a gesture that made me feel marginally better about myself after having flown across the Pacific Ocean on a mostly empty plane. I got out on the morning of day 22. The bus ride into Kowloon went by Lion Rock. I couldn't help staring at it. Kowloon was my backyard. I went straight to the hospital to see my dad. He had an accident a few months ago and had 2 surgeries that removed most of his brain. Because of COVID, this was only the 3rd time anyone from my family had gotten to see him in person, and the first time since he had been transferred to this hospital. He was unconscious the entire time during my visit. I took some videos to show Mom later that the room he got looked pretty good. Back home, I hung out with my mom. I listened to her stories. We went through my father's clothes together. She decided to keep all of them for now. I went on a hike with my sister and we talked about future plans for the family. Hong Kong was beautiful. I realized I've never had the chance to experience the city as an adult. I haven't really seen most of the city. I felt like a tourist, finding beauty everywhere, even at the vaccination site next to the projects. I spent hours laying in my childhood bed. I stared out of my childhood window. I zoned out at the electric fan shaking its head because my mom still thought air conditioning is bad for me. But it was time to leave home again. I got another COVID test, the 5th one for the trip. I got another one-way ticket and onto another mostly empty plane. This time, the stopover was in South Korea. Things were still pretty weird, but I had gotten used to it by now. I missed my dad. Yet, I felt less uneasy about the future. I felt a bit better than before the trip. I got back to DC. I breezed through customs. There was virtually no checkpoints anywhere. In fact, it was probably the easiest time I've had in almost 20 years of flying into this country. I went straight home to my pregnant wife. A month later, little Annie was born. And after a 2-day stay at the hospital, we went back to our place in DC, and just the 3 of us, we went home. I am not John Wilson. Thank you for watching.